Do you know who invented the telephone? If you guessed Alexander Graham Bell, you'd be right. But did you know that his last name is actually spelled with all capital letters? It's true. His name was Alexander Melville Bell. And today, we are going to learn how he invented one of the most important devices in human history, the telephone. Our story begins in Edinburgh, Scotland, in 1847. Young Alexander was born profoundly deaf. He had two older brothers, and his mother was worried that he wouldn't be able to communicate with other people. So she hired a teacher named John Watson to work with him privately. But it wasn't easy. At first, Alexander couldn't understand what other people were saying because they didn't know sign language. So John tried something else. He wrote the words to a sentence on a blackboard and then erased some of the letters. For example, he might write, "This is a book," and then erase the T, H, E, and B. Then young Alexander had to guess what the sentence was. This exercise helped develop Alexander's powers of observation and deduction. And soon he was able to communicate with his teacher without the help of written words. By the time he turned 12, he could understand spoken words better than most people his age. After this, Alexander wanted to help other deaf people communicate as well. So he became an elocution teacher, which means he taught people how to speak and write. But there was a problem. In those days, there was no effective treatment for deafness. So Alexander started experimenting with different ways to make hearing aids. He studied sound waves and built a device that could help people hear sounds more clearly. But he wasn't satisfied with his invention. He wanted to do more. So in 1867, he moved to Boston, where he met a famous scientist named Thomas Edison. Together, they worked on improving the telegraph. The telegraph was a device that allowed people to send messages across long distances using electric signals. But there was a problem. With the telegraph, you couldn't have a conversation with someone. You could only send brief messages. And if you wanted to talk to someone, you'd have to send a telegraph operator along with you. So Alexander and Thomas had an idea. What if they could build a device that could transmit the sound of a person's voice over long distances? This would be a much easier and cheaper way to communicate. But how do you transmit the sound of a voice over long distances? That's when Alexander had a breakthrough. He realized that he could use electricity to transmit sound waves through a wire. He called his invention the telephone. On March 10, 1876, he was awarded a patent for his invention. And just 2 months later, he made the first ever telephone call. He was in his office at the American Bell Telephone Company in Boston, and he asked his assistant to come to his office. When his assistant heard the sound of his voice coming from the telephone, he was astounded. He immediately went to see Mr. Bell, and so the telephone was invented. Soon, people all over the world were using the telephone to talk to each other. Alexander was a rich man, but he never forgot about the people who inspired him to invent the telephone. He donated a lot of money to help deaf people, and he also created schools and hospitals for them. He was a hero to the deaf, and he's a hero to us all. That's all for today. See you next time.